particular order. I'm just going to call on different individuals that I see that have joined us for this morning's meeting and allow for you to do a brief introduction. So a name, what organization you represent, and perhaps your role at that particular organization. And of course, if you have other individuals, staff members present with you that are not logged in separately, feel free to introduce those individuals as well. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Mitch Askeret.
Thanks, Janine. Hi, everyone. My name is Mitch Askeret, and I am the Director of Marketing and Development at Beacon Group.
Thank you, Mitchell. Good morning. And then I see Deborah Frent. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Good morning and thank you. My name is Debbie Frent, and I'm with Catholic Community Services of Southern Arizona Vocational Services.
Thank you, Deborah. Nice to have you this morning.
Thank you.
And then I see Robert Britton.
Hello, thank you. Again, my name is Robert Britton. I am the Director of IT with Beacon.
Hi, Robert. Nice to have you this morning. All right, and then I see Irma Lamas.
Hi, good morning. I am Irma Llamas and from Hope Incorporated, and I am the fleet manager.
Thank you, Irma. And then I see Meg Knight from the Tucson Jewish Community Center. Good morning, Meg.
Morning, everyone. Meg Knight from the Tucson Jewish Community Center. I am the grant writer there. Work closely with the our Disability Program Services Department that oversees this grant.
Great. Thank you, Meg. Good morning. And then I see Jerry from the Beacon Group. Good morning, Jerry.
Good morning. It's Jerry Lucius from Beacon Group. I'm glad to be at this meeting.
Glad to have you.
Everyone. Thank you.
And then John Hawbaker.
Hi, I'm John Hawbaker from the town of Oro Valley and do a little bit of everything that needs done because we don't have that many people.
All right. Good morning, John. Glad to have you. Steve Knapp.
Good morning. I'm Steve Nath with Hope Inc. I'm the operations manager. I do facilities and I assist Irma with transportation.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Dylan Garrity.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Dylan Garrity. I'm the transit planner here at SunTran.
Great. Thank you, Dylan. Glad to have you this morning. Eric Geller.
Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Geller. I'm Associate Director with Easter Seals Blake Foundation.
Great. Good morning, Eric. Glad you could join us this morning. Let me see if I missed anyone else. As I was doing the introductions, I don't want to inadvertently miss someone. I think I have anyone. If I did miss someone, please correct me on that, and we'll make sure that we allow you an opportunity to make an introduction. And then if anyone joins the call a little bit late, we'll try to circle back and allow them to have an introduction as well. So good morning, everyone. We're glad to have you. We're going to go ahead and move to the next item on the agenda. For the most part, concluded introductions. So the next part is in-kind form. You've probably heard this spoken before if you've attended our meetings in the past. So regional planning efforts are enhanced by recording any time that's donated by attendees, any volunteers or participants. And so PAG collects that data on the time dedicated to those meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. So if you're paid with federal dollars, please let me know now. Either raise your hand, shoot me an email, however you see fit. But it's important for us to not include your time today in our in-kind calculations. So we want to make sure we're honest on that. And so with that being said, the time spent in preparation for this meeting is going to be estimated by PAG staff, are not only responsible, but knowledgeable of the agenda and meeting materials. And of course, at the conclusion of this meeting, a session report will automatically calculate your time spent in this meeting. And then of course, time spent working on PAG or RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. So once again, if your position is paid for through federal dollars, please let us know verbally now so we can make a record of that, or send me an email, and I will use that as acknowledgement that you're paid for, your position's paid through federal dollars. All right, so with that being said, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next item on the agenda. And so we're really excited to have this presentation for us today. It's a vehicle inspection platform presentation by the Beacon Group, and they were kind enough to do this presentation for us the last working group meeting, but technology was not our friend that day. And so they were gracious enough to be willing to do it again. So we're going to have them lead this conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to Mitchell Eskert from the Beacon Group to open it up, and then he'll allow for his colleagues to participate as well. So thank you, Mitchell.
Thank you, Janine, and thank you, everybody. Yeah, as I introduced earlier, I'm Mitch Eskert. I'm with the Beacon Group. I've also got our Director of Information Technology, Robert Britton, and our Lead of Fleet and Facilities, Jerry Lucius, on the call. Today, we'd like to demo our vehicle inspection app that we developed about 6 months ago. As I'm sure you all know, part of the ADOT program, we are required to submit vehicle inspections. We are required to track repairs on vehicles, mileage, everything like that. So we've developed this digital system to do it. Previously we were doing primarily handwritten paperwork, and we found that this digital system allows our managers to track the overall vehicle maintenance and obviously the daily inspections as well. So without further ado, I would like to turn over to our Director of IT, Rob Britton, to kind of talk about the technical aspects. And the one thing I'll add just before I do that is just if anybody is interested in this product, we're happy to kind of share how we got there. We've developed a somewhat advanced app, so but we have some more simpler versions that could easily be created, and we're happy to show anybody who is interested. So go ahead, Rob.
Thanks, Mitch. The first thing I'm going to talk about a little bit about is why we chose the Microsoft 365 platform, which is what we founded this on. And one of the benefits, or many of the benefits, are financial as well as the way they integrate together. So one of the things, first off, with Microsoft 365, it not only includes what they used to call Office 365, which has all those apps that we normally use in the Microsoft Office for the last 30 some years, but it also incorporates their Power Platform. And their Power Platform, I'll talk just briefly about, just to let you know what they are and how we use them and incorporate them into this app. So what the great things about the Microsoft platform with all of the Office installs is pretty much all of the features. There's a few that are not, but almost every feature is available online that's available locally. And it allows you to access the data, whether it's a spreadsheet or whatever, very easily in a web browser, or you can access it locally with Microsoft Excel or whatever. And using OneDrive, it'll keep those in sync. And so it makes for a natural experience for our employees, so they can work within File Explorer or something if that's what they're used to, or they can work with the cloud. With that comes advanced security, availability, and redundancy that, quite honestly, if we had to do it ourselves, Beacon Group would have troubles affording the technical expertise and the equipment that we get with this. So it allows us to be much more secure and much more reliable than we would on our own. As a nonprofit, Microsoft offers many of these products free or heavily discounted. So if I remember correctly, talking with our accounting department, it's in the 6 figures of donations that we receive from Microsoft every year. So very advantageous for the nonprofit community. Many of the things that I'll show you in just a little bit require no or low code options. So if you have ever used Visio, say, in the past, or maybe, I'll show my age, but maybe you used Microsoft Access for small databases in the past to access them or make it easy to share some data. It's very simple like that, but it can become very complex if you need. And also one of the last things is I try to do everything based on the hit by a truck scenario. So my idea is if I'm ever hit by a truck and can't show up one day, Beacon Group should be able to continue working. They should be able to move on. And one of those things is how do they find support? So although I created these things, I'm not required to be the one to have to carry it on. Being a Microsoft 365 platform, it opens up to literally thousands of vendors that can help support. So if I reach something that's above my pay grade, a little bit higher than I understand, I can reach out to a consultant. If I want them to do the entire project like we have on some other ones, we can completely farm it out to them. They can do it, and then maybe I take control afterwards with the updates and the tweaks that we like to do. So it really gives us a cost-effective platform, something that can be very simple but allows to be complex, and also we'll be able to have support for it moving forward. So directly speaking for the vehicle inspections, we really looked at how we could do this. And one of the things we could have done is we could have made this very, very simple. We could have just done a spreadsheet. We could have made it online, made it accessible via the web browser or local Excel, and they could have filled it out. And we could do that. And that would allow us to at least audit a lot easier when needed. That was one option. Another one is then maybe using a Microsoft SharePoint list. And so for those that may not be familiar with the SharePoint list, I will show you our list here. Wrong one. I don't usually use, bear with me. There we go. So the is kind of a glorified spreadsheet, if you will. So things can be laid out just like a spreadsheet. And you can quickly see where we're grabbing much of the data that would be on that normal form, but allows us to capture it here. One of the nice things about stepping up from a spreadsheet into a list, though, is it gives you some forms and basic formatting. So we can go in very easily and change any of these columns to be numeric, to be a calculated field, to be text, to be a drop down, et cetera, et cetera. By doing that with drop downs, it makes it really good to format that data. And so it's always in the same way we want them. But also it immediately gives you an editing form that you wouldn't have in Excel. So for instance, if I wanted to create a new one, this is all out of the box, instantly created when I say I want these columns, just like I would in Excel. But now I have a form and they could easily fill this out. So that's the next step up from a spreadsheet that we could start with and would work well. And it also then gives us many different views. So we could, and this is just an all items view, but we can do things like we can create a view anytime we want right here. We can create one from this one, and we could really specialize the data that we want to see. We could filter that data. Additionally, even from the all items, every column can be filtered and sorted and et cetera, just like Excel. So this allows you to create these very easily reportable data sets. So then you can export that to Excel or something, whatever you need to do to then report on it. So that's a good step there. Where we ended up going is another step up. 364 power, or excuse me, Microsoft 365 Power Apps. We then created an app, and I'm just going to basically, you can kind of get an idea how simple or how complex it can be. So this is our app. In the basic sense, we're creating this to work on a phone. And when they first open it up, this is what they see. And they get the option to select from a list of vehicles. And once they do that, then it updates and it gives them the ability to fill things out. I'm going to let Jerry display this, but what I really wanted to show is that most of this is just a drag and drop of pieces. So I want a drop down, I drag and drop. I want a text field, I drag and drop. But I can also get much more complex if I want by actually being able to code. I'm not going to go into the gory details of coding because that would put you to sleep. But we can get complex when needed, and that allows us to manipulate data that might be on the form before you save, maybe a little bit after you save, and etc. So the app gives us this, but it gives us an ability to then either publish it out as a URL, or we can publish it as a Power Apps app on a phone. So the Microsoft provides the Power Apps app free on iOS or Android devices, and any app that you're given access to is then available on that app. So that makes it really nice. We can push that out to whom we want, allows us to control who can access and who can see that data. I'm going to quit sharing here, so I won't. So then beyond that, the Microsoft 365 gives us a little bit more flexibility in that it allows us to talk to other things. So one of the other features inside of Microsoft 365 is called Power Automate. Power Automate is a workflow automation program that's very low code, no code, or again, you can get very distinct or very complex if you need to. So I'm going to show one of the Power Apps that we use with the vehicles. So once a vehicle is at, we can create this flow that says when an inspection item is created, create some variables. So if you've ever worked with Visio, that's like either doing an org chart or doing a flow chart, this is exactly like that. You're basically creating the flow chart of what you need to do, but you can actually drag and drop the code of what you want. So in this case, I say, does fleet need to be notified about this inspection? So if they do an inspection and they save it, there's certain things that need to flag to say, all right, fleet may need to repair something. They may need to take a look at something, but we don't want them to get notified every time someone does an inspection, because then they'll just be inundated with those. So I actually have, as an example, here's a condition where it looks for changes for particular items. And this can get pretty complex, but we don't have to do this all the time. We don't have to create special rules. We don't have to look at every inspection and decide. Instead, what this ends up doing is by the time it gets done, at the very bottom, it actually creates an issue. We have a separate system called our support app, and IT uses that as well as fleet and facilities. So if something needs to be reported to them, this automatically creates an issue inside of the support app. So in an app like this, then Jerry would be able to see that a vehicle has come in, or whoever he wants, that an issue has come in for a vehicle that they need to address. My point to all that is, so it's very simple to choose these items and get it out there without having to use actual manual processes. I got a piece of paper, I got to file it away, then I got to look at it, I got to say, oh, there is a problem, and punch that into another system. Instead, all this is entered once and it flows all the way through. With the Power Apps, one of the things I wanted to mention, one of the keys is it's Power Apps as well as Power BI, which I'll talk about for reporting. What's good about this Power Platform is it doesn't have to be a specific type of data. You could use that spreadsheet that you started with, and that spreadsheet could be the database or a Power App or a Power BI. You could use the list, and you could move to the list and then use a form, and then maybe you move to the Power App after that. The good thing is you don't lose the work you did on the way up. An Excel sheet can be imported into a list, so you don't lose the work. And a list can be used as your data source for the Power App. But then if you start to outgrow that, get bigger, you can then move to more complicated systems like SQL databases. So you could take all that data out of the list, move it to SQL. You could have that SQL on-premise or up in the cloud. You could, so you can vary in that. It gives you all that flexibility. but it can also be very simple. And that's what we really liked about using this platform. Lastly is the Power BI. So yes, you get all this data together. You get issue or inspections listed, you get all this data and you got to do something about it. And then all of a sudden you get a call that says, hey, we're going to be in next month to do an audit and we want to be able to pull out everything that's been inspected on vehicles XYZ. You can export that to Excel and have a complete file. You can export that to CSV you want, or you could use Power BI. And Power BI as part of the platform is business intelligence. So it allows you to take all that data from those different places and then report it into key performance indicators, logs, and et cetera that can already be massaged. So then you literally would just open up, click a button to export. You could export to a CSV and send it off to an auditor to take a look at. So that's really nice. Just so you know, we're so early in the phase, we haven't even put this into Power BI yet. We've done that with our issues database and et cetera. But this opens up that opportunity that once we have users comfortable using it, once we have all of fleet and facilities comfortable using it, then we can take those next steps. And the less manual processes that we have to do and the less that we have to repeat makes it where we can spend our time on just the reporting and the easy monitoring of the abnormalities, not the everyday mundane. That's a good overview, and I don't mind answering questions about that later if you want, or if when we're done at a later point you'd like to talk a little bit, Mitch will pass on my information. I don't mind discussing how we made some decisions one-on-one with anybody, but suffice it to say that we really liked that it can meet the needs that you need. Very simple, up to complex. And again, it makes it so that going forward, you're not pigeonholed into a little, say, a very proprietary program that you're being held hostage. You can't leave to a better program. Instead, this is something that can be adjusted by me or by a consultant who can come in and very quickly look at it, start making adjustments. So that's really nice. After that, I'll leave it up to Jerry to show you how you use it, how they use it, and what they do, and then how that fits in there.
Yeah, and while Jerry's pulling up the app and sharing his screen, I just wanted to reiterate that the whole point of this was to simplify it for our drivers, to create an easy process for them to complete the inspection and submit an issue with a vehicle in the same stroke. It really has streamlined our communication. It makes it so much easier on our fleet and facilities department to know when there's a challenge with a vehicle. Previously somebody would maybe tell somebody, or they would tell one of our maintenance people, hey, there's a chip in this windshield, and then it would never, it would take a while to get resolved because somebody would forget or it wasn't really logged properly. It logs it instantly, and it's so much easier. And our drivers are not tech savvy. I mean, I'm not even that tech savvy, but learning to use the inspection app is relatively easy, and Jerry will show you that right now.
Okay, this is our screen here. We are actually going to share this here. This is our inspection of one of our vehicles. Can everybody see that inspection?
Not yet.
Right. Okay. Let's see here. I'm trying to.
I think he may have logged himself out. Mitch, I'll go ahead and pull it up real quick so that everyone can see it.
Okay.
Maybe he'll come back on in a moment. Bear with me just a moment because I didn't have that prepared, but I'll show it to you now. There we go. So let's pretend this is on a phone. This is, I'm actually showing this from my development platform, but this gives the view exactly what it would look like on a phone. But what he would be able to show you is that the employee checking out the vehicle would then just tap on their phone and they get presented with a list of available vehicles. And we can adjust that based on what fleet has. When they select one, it then does a query of that and it brings up a form that allows them to fill out a lot of information. So they're going to be able to fill out where their job site's at. And then all of these types of questions here are all straight off of the paper form that they used to do. So this does a couple things. It helps them remember what to look for. So it's kind of a checklist, but it also allows us to gather the data on that. So they would simply choose whether it's good or needs attention in these overall vehicle inspection conditions. And you'll see that I've already set it to default to good because the vast majority of the time things are okay. But this way they can look and they can say, oh, okay, I do need to check that. And they can go through all of those items one by one. And then also, because one of the things they said they need to be able to track were the number of clients that are in that particular travel event that they're going through. So they can enter those numbers in there. Yeah, that's a big vehicle. We'll go 5. And then also look at the inventory items. And then when they're all done, they can then add notes. Like they might want to say, I found damage on the left front fender, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if any of these items, like if there's a note filled out, if the inventory is missing instead of in the vehicle, instead of good, if any of these items say no, then what will happen is when they save that, it not only captures that data, it then creates an issue for our fleet staff to be able to follow up on that vehicle.
Yeah, and it was
Gary,
important for
did you get a
us
chance
to
to join us? Oh,
I was just going to say it was important for us to make this form a single page too, again, to simplify it as much as possible. All of our vehicles have the numbering very visible on it. So anybody who's a driver is going to go out and see a vehicle, they're going to see the number right away, select the number, and in a matter of a few minutes can complete this inspection. Did Jerry join us again or no?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I'm back.
Do you have anything you want to add, Jerry?
No. You guys pretty much covered up most of it, everything.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that. I'm just I don't do many of these meetings.
Does anybody have any questions about the vehicle inspections app?
I had a question, Mitchell. And perhaps this was shared. I was trying to take really great notes, so I might have missed it. But so a couple things. I was wondering if there's the opportunity, maybe it's an integration that you can adopt, or maybe it's not. But when they were doing the one-page checklist, and let's say there was new damage, and I know there was a place to take notes. Is there a place to upload a photo? Like if you took photos of the damage, that you could upload that as additional documentation? And in the same spirit, you said that kind of creates a report on like actionable items. So kind of two things. One would be, there are some items that based on ADOT's guidelines, if there's a deficit, if you will, in those categories, that the vehicle automatically needs to be removed from service. Is there a component to it that in that report where it kind of flags it as potentially need to be removed from service based on those elements? And then the second part is, when things do need repair or they are taken out of service, there's a documentation piece that has to get sent up to ADOT to affirm that it's been resolved. And obviously for auditing purposes, et cetera, maintenance records, et cetera, are very important. So I was just wondering what components are available to upload documents to support through the app. So I know it's a long-winded question, kind of the top 3 things that came to mind.
I'll jump in here for you, Mitch. So what we wanted to do in the very first stage was just get the paper replaced. I mean, that was the first thing. So what we've done is we've replaced the paper. Right now, Fleet is still then following up from there, and they're using their other procedures to follow up on the maintenance, pulling things out of service, and et cetera. That being said, those are some of the things that we will be adding. For instance, we've already discussed being able to flag when they choose a vehicle that says, hey, we already know that there's a dent on the left front fender or the driver's side front fender, or, you know, that kind of a thing. So we've addressed being able to have ongoing issues so that we don't have that reported every single time. So that's something we'll be adding soon. And yes, it's very easy to add an object to take a picture. So for instance, we've used that in an other purpose where we need to capture a signature page that someone has filled out. They can just click a button, put the camera there, tap a button, and then say upload, and then it uploads it and takes care of it. So that's another one of those things that we'll be adding. And then when it comes to the process for our Fleet to then talk to ADOT and do all that reporting, those are things that once we get this settled, then we can look at, okay, what's the next thing we can automate? What's the next step we can take out of manual process?
Very
Yeah, because
good.
right now,
And Jerry could chime in beyond that.
yeah, well, yeah, I'll let Jerry speak, and I would say that Jim Campbell, who's not here today, he typically would see an issue, and then when a vehicle is taken out of rotation, Jerry and his team would get it repaired, and then Jim would handle the documentation sending to ADOT. But all that's still manual and not necessarily solved by the system. But as Rob mentioned earlier, the system is highly customizable, and it can fit the needs of our program and anybody's program. We're just starting to scratch the surface of it, and that's why we wanted to share it with everybody, because it can be a process that other agencies can go through with us if they're interested in kind of pursuing this more automated digital way to replace the manual way that we've been doing for many years.
And also just to kind of piggyback off of that, one of the examples is, first off, we had just a hard-coded list of vehicles. And then we've started moving, and I'm creating an admin screen where Fleet can then tap a button that'll be on this app, and here's a list of vehicles, and they can easily tap one and say that one's no longer in service, and then it won't even be available to someone in the drop down. So there's things like that we're already starting to make those steps. I just can't show them to you yet.
Sure. No, that's exciting. I was just curious if what the scope was, if you will, for integrations, you know, not to suggest that you had to have all these in place right now in this moment, but just what the capability was. Is that something that is within the scope of what it offers? So thank you. I appreciate that.
Hey, this is John from Oro Valley. I just wanted to say that is awesome. That whole thing is awesome. You have to develop there. Not something we need right this minute, but I tell you, if we needed something, thank you. That's just awesome.
Thanks, John.
Is there a cap on like the number of users or permissions for users or vehicles you can have in a fleet under a certain type of platform? Because we have a lot of organizations on the call today, and some have really large fleets, and then others are, you know, much smaller. So just curious if there's, you know, certain packages, if you will, are geared towards people that have really small fleets, and then others that are far more expansive, or I don't know to what extent you got into those kinds of discussions, but I was just curious if you knew.
Yeah, and that really goes down to what you use as your data source, and that's where you kind of got to tap in and kind of look a little bit and have an IT person or a consultant work on that. But basically speaking, if it's a SharePoint list like we are now, you're really limited to what the SharePoint list can handle. So a SharePoint list can handle something like 1 million records. So it can handle holding over 1 million inspections, that kind of a thing. But there's other limitations. So when you get to where things become too big, it gets limited. So our normal license that we have for Microsoft 365 covers an app for free if it's using a SharePoint list. So we don't have to pay any extra licensing beyond what we already are. So that's really nice. Now, where it gets a limit is they don't like to be able they don't like you to be able to pull more than 5,000 records at a time. They don't want you to see more than 5,000. So there can be several million actually in there. I can't remember what the total is. But you can only see so many at a time because they don't want to inundate their systems on SharePoint because it's not as robust as, say, a SQL server. So what they do is they limit it there. And as long as you can filter it out in the background and make it work, you can use that for free. But as soon as you want to step up to the next level, then what they do is say, okay, let's move you to SQL. Okay, well, if you got SQL, then it's basically unlimited. There are limits to SQL, but they're so high. For most people, it's unlimited. And then you have to buy an extra license. And the way they do that is they say you can get a per app license or a per user license. And what we've kind of figured out is if you're going to have 1 or 2 apps, it's better to do a per app. And as soon as somebody's going to need 3 apps or more, it's better to do a per user because that price then starts to save. And then every app you do beyond that, you're saving even more money. Microsoft also offers things like if you use Teams for collaboration and sharing of data and et cetera, you can actually create apps inside of a team that uses what's called their Dataverse. And their Dataverse is based on Dynamics. So it's very high-end data. You can use that for free as long as you can stay within inside a team. We find that's not the way we can do things. So we need to be able to use more of a web browser or an app, that kind of a thing. So we can't take advantage of that one. But right now we're using SharePoint lists, so it's included. At some point, if we get too big, then yes, we can move on to SQL Server, but we just have to change the licensing.
And then Janine, I just wanted to follow up on the part of your question about different size providers, right? With different fleet sizes. Our fleet is 50 to 60 vehicles, and they all import in that list, which is a lot. There would be ways that you could probably set like a qualifier prior to that list populating. So like say you had different regions of the county where there were vehicles like East County, North County, West County. You could probably regionalize the vehicles, or maybe you had a different type of vehicle. So you had like vans and you had buses and you could set kind of some qualifiers to get a smaller list. So like for a small provider who maybe has 8 vehicles, this would be the perfect solution. If you had like 100 vehicles and there was like maybe 20 of one type and 50 of another type and 30 of another type, then you could have a pre-qualifier that would say like select type of vehicle. Okay, I want to select vans with lifts, and then all of your vans with lifts would show up. So it wouldn't be such an overwhelming list in that first category.
Mm-hmm. And you could even set that based on the size that you need. If you need more than 5, you need more than 10 or whatever. So Mitch is absolutely correct. All that can be filtered out.
No, that's great feedback because there are some organizations that would be more in that category, and especially some that they're serving in multiple regions. So they would perhaps want to delineate between those that are in the PAG region and those that are in a different region, but still be able to capture all that data. So that's great. Thank you.
And the same thing goes for like outputting the data too. If you wanted to output, like we're in PAG and MAG, and I'm not sure how we output it, but you probably could output the results into specific groups. So like if you had a facilities team in the MAG and PAG region, if a vehicle had an issue in the MAG region, it wouldn't go to the PAG region. It could just go to the facilities team in the MAG region. So there's a lot of customization you can do there.
Very good. Any other questions for Mr. Britton and Mr. Eskret before we move on to the next item on the agenda?
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate everyone. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Mitchell. All right. So we're going to move to, I'm sorry, go ahead. Oh, I thought someone said something. Okay. So we're going to move to the next item on the agenda, which is driver evaluation practices. And so if you had an opportunity to review the document that I sent out to help us prepare for particular discussion, you might recall that I kind of gave you some prompts or some questions to consider. for yourself so that we can make the most of our discussion time this morning. So the first portion of driver evaluation practices has to do with onboarding. And so when you're thinking about your own onboarding practices for your drivers, your staff, et cetera, but since we're talking about specifically driver evaluation, I would like to keep it within the scope of drivers specifically. But when you think about your onboarding practices, there's lots of different elements that can be included that. And so I kind of gave you a like a running list, food for thought of things that might be a part of your onboarding practices. It's not necessarily an all-inclusive list. So my hope was that you could kind of glean through that list and say, yes, we do a lot of those pieces, and perhaps share a little bit about what your approach is for some of those elements. And if there's some things that you did incorporate into your practices, but they're not reflected on the list, you could say, you know what, there's another item that might be worth discussing, and this is what it's called, and here's how we approach it. And then if you want to give some constructs or constraints around what that process looks like in terms of time frame, like we spend so many hours, or this is a 3-day training, or this part of our onboarding practice lasts a few weeks, or the whole onboarding practice lasts, a period of so many days, however you want to frame it. But I think having that context and then kind of a landscape of how long it takes to onboard a particular driver and the whys behind it, I think is helpful for us to kind of share. Because one of the things about coordination is really just sharing a lot of best practices. And that's part of the reason why we started out today's meeting with allowing the Beacon Group to kind of share one of their best practices and things that they're doing well in their organization as part of this working group and being a 5310 sub-recipient. So with that, I thought a good place to start might be focusing on driver evaluation practices. And if you think back, there was a season where a lot of organizations were struggling to hire drivers. And then those that had drivers, they want to make sure they hold on to them. So onboarding is one piece of kind of both sides of that. And so I thought it might be a good place to start with our discussion today. So I'm going to try and just act more like a facilitator and keep the discussion going. So I'm going to be relying heavily on all the participants in today's call to really share their thoughts and all in their organizations so that we can learn from one another and kind of build a stronger sense of community in that way, and that we can reach out to one another and learn from one another and all get stronger in different areas as a result of sharing our bench strengths. So with that said, who would like to share a little bit about what pieces they've included in their onboarding for their driver evaluation practices, if you will? Or I'll just call on somebody, but it'd be good if we had a volunteer to start it out. How about that? So let me ask, go ahead.
This is John.
John.
When you're onboarding, are you talking about when you first hire somebody, or what do you mean?
Yes. Okay, so that's a good question. So so it's basically from the point of hire. So let's say it's day one on the job. There's kind of an orientation, if you will, that takes place, or some type of in-service training. So I would call that kind of like phase one, if you will. And then phase two might be, okay, we've done the initial part where they kind of know, where they work and what their responsibilities are, and where they put their lunchbox, so to speak. But now we need to get them trained, and the very first few elements that we really need to get them trained on are X, Y, and Z. And then being a sub-recipient of 5310s, there's specific things we want to make sure that they are excellent in, and so we're going to add those to the list. And then maybe there's some other pieces that are more like supplemental training, like it's not necessarily required, but because you're raising the bar on your standards, you include these elements. And maybe there's another phase, if you will, that's like, this is recurring training or recertifications that we ask our drivers to go through, or these are just little assessments that we do periodically to make sure people are still sharp and remembering all the details that matter. So anything in that space, but we can start from the beginning and kind of work towards the latter, if that's helpful. So that's some of the things that I put on the list that I sent out was like anything from obviously vehicle inspection and maintenance, which we kind of touched on a little bit through Beacon Group's presentation, but it could be about safety monitoring, it could be about safety rules, how you track trends, how do you handle emergencies, how do your drivers get trained on how to deal with aggressive or disruptive passengers or any kind of behavioral challenges of riders, et cetera. So the landscape is pretty broad. So I'm just kind of opening up to see what you incorporated into your onboarding practices. And I thought I saw a hand up for a moment and then lost count of who it was.
Hi,
So
Janine.
I apologize.
Yeah, I thought I'd jump in and say, okay, well, we could share what we do.
Okay.
Our onboarding. So before we actually hire a person, they need to send in a MVD report, and that's sent to Irma, and Irma will check it out and make sure that it's good to go. Once that happens, then they might offer the person the position. Once they come on board, their first week they go through new employee orientation. Part of that is in person and part of that is online, and most of the driver stuff is online with them, and they get introduced to our paperwork, what our expectations are during inclement weather, things like that. And then before we actually let them get behind a wheel, they have to complete a hands-on training with one of our program coordinators or with Irma or myself. And that includes going back through all the paperwork, walking them through a vehicle inspection, having them go out and learn how to use a lift on a vehicle or the ramp and securing people, as well as going through a safety training, which is a PowerPoint where we cover some of the basic common sense stuff like, are you adjusting your mirrors and are you making sure the seats correctly adjusted? And then we make sure that they can drive our vehicle. So if somebody's never driven one of our lift buses before, we start them off in the minivans, then 12 passengers. And when they feel confident, then we'll spend time with them learning, helping them feel comfortable in the larger 14 passenger buses. But that initial new employee training on Relias and then the hands-on with us, they have to do all of that before we give them permission to drive the vehicle with passengers. Once they do that, they get a fuel card code, and we just want to make sure that we've done due diligence before we turn them loose.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate that, Steve. And I see Mitchell Esprit has his hand up. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I was just gonna say we're doing a lot of the same things that Steve just mentioned. One thing that I'll add is that our drivers are also providing direct supports in employment for the people we serve. So they do a little bit of job shadowing their first week on the job. So they are typically going out with a veteran job coach. We call them job coaches. They're drivers and direct support professionals. So they go out with a veteran, and the job shadowing works both ways. They can learn to be better at their job and learn some best practices, but also the veteran job coach can kind of provide a brief evaluation of if they think this person will work, if there's anything that they notice that's challenging. The other thing that we do, Steve mentioned the MVD reports. We do that as well. We also require all of our drivers to provide them on an annual basis. So somebody's driving record might be clean when they get hired, but if they have any issues, we will at least find out about them when they have to resubmit that report, if not sooner.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Anyone else?
One thing I was just going to add is, we had an incident where a vehicle ran into some of our solar panels about several months ago, and it actually made some of our drivers kind of nervous about driving the 14-passenger van. So I guess if anybody has any recommendations on how to overcome some staff apprehension, they saw the person run into it was like a covered parking with solar panels on top of it. And so a lot of people were nervous about driving those vans after. So if anybody has any ways to kind of help with that, that'd be great.
All right. Thank you.
We take folks to like a mall parking lot,
okay.
A large parking lot where there's not a lot of traffic, and just get them used to feeling and being able to look up and understand where their mirrors are. And I having been an over-the-road driver in another life, I really explained to everybody smaller movements means smaller corrections. So we you know, like we let people know, don't move into a spot that looks trepidatious when you're looking at it. You know, don't pull into an area where there's awnings if you're not comfortable with it. Don't, you know, if you wouldn't do a 3-point turn with a VW, you definitely don't want to take your bus in there. So we really kind of drive home those common sense things and step them up gradually. Like I literally, it was just about 3 weeks ago. We had a guy start about 6 months ago, started with minivans. Once he felt comfortable in one of those, we put him in a 12 passenger. He felt comfortable with that. And at the beginning of October, he's like, I think I'm ready to learn how to drive the bus. And so that's what we did. We spent a couple hours. You know, when you teach somebody how to pull into a parking space in a parking lot, that gives them a lot of confidence because that's probably one of the tightest situations you can get into. And it really helps them look at all their angles and how the corner of the bus moves when the front is moving in a particular direction. So once you familiarize them with that, it takes some of the scariness away from those larger vehicles.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. That's great feedback. John, do you have any insights on this? Because I know your fleet is a little bit different than some of the other organizations, but you might deal with some of the larger vehicles a little bit more frequently than some of the smaller organizations. Do you have any thoughts or perspectives on how to help ease people's, fears or concerns about driving some of these larger vehicles?
Well, some of the stuff that you said at the very beginning is right on, spot on with what we do. We provide a day of classroom training and training out in the bus yard on the vehicles initially to basically go through all of the basic knowledge items they need to be a driver. And then they do some ride-alongs with other drivers and they get to see and do what they learned. And then we bring them back in and we go over other kinds of things that are unusual things that could happen, like if they have to evacuate the bus. And with the drug and alcohol stuff, we have to go through with them, and the PTASP safety thing that the federal government requires us to go over with them, and all those other kinds of things that aren't necessarily day to day, but are things that are required that we go through with them before they're qualified to actually drive on their own. So all that stuff is pretty much spot on. But then the bulk of the training is 5 more ride-alongs or drive-alongs with other drivers on an actual route. And they slowly start doing more and more of it themselves with the drivers coaching them. And then we have what we call final exam or final check ride that they go through. And it's more of a, how are you feeling? Do you feel comfortable going out on your own? And the driver that they're with also makes an assessment and says either, yeah, I think this person is ready to go, or they say, no, let's do a few more ride-alongs with this person to make sure they know the ins and outs of all the different kinds of wheelchairs and power chairs and things like that they might have to secure, stuff like that. So, but you kind of laid it out really good at the beginning, I thought. Teach them the basics first, get them out there, and then fill in all the other kinds of things that have to be done. And also, I was going to say, we do use the PASS training program for a lot of the training that we do. So, and we keep a set of certified PASS trainers so that we can provide that training. So that's what we do.
Thank you, John. I appreciate you sharing, especially since I just put you on the spot. So thank you.
No problem.
Anyone else? The next agenda item will be how to overcome fears from the presenter putting you on the spot for facilitating discussions. So All right, well, I think we can move on to the next item on our agenda, which is for I shouldn't say the next item on the agenda, the next portion of the driver evaluation practices was about driver assessment. And so I'm going to let the slides circle back. So me on that, I gave the wrong prompt. I said the next item on the agenda, but I meant next item with regard to driver evaluation practices, which is driver assessment. And so for driver assessment, it can have the same feel, if you will, as part of your onboarding, but I guess I'm taking it from a high level view down a little bit more to street view, in the sense that when you're actually doing a driver assessment, whether it be like the ride-alongs that were characterized or other pieces of kind of that driver training, when you're talking about either a minivan all the way up to like the 15 passenger, what are the things that you're looking for in that assessment or that evaluation? So it could be things from like driver attentiveness to lane changes to speed control, right? The difference between a safe speed and the speed limit, right? And then hazard perceptions, if you want to call it that, or following distance, complete stops, all different types of elements, all the way to like securement of wheelchairs, et cetera. So I was just curious what elements are looked at or evaluated, so to speak, when you're doing either what we would call a ride along or some other kind of driver assessment tool. So if anyone wants to speak to that, that would be great.
Janine, this is John again.
Hi, John.
You had on the other question had talked about some other stuff I was going to talk about too, and I forgot. So at least once a year, we do a very thorough driver evaluation from beginning to end of walking in the building until they leave the building. So including pre-trips, all of that stuff. And the way we do our form is we're able to say, hey, you did this really good and this really good and this really good. And kind of get them feeling really positive about the whole discussion afterwards. But then we have this section called coaching points. And we put in there, as far as this part goes, you didn't really follow the policy exactly right. Maybe a better way of doing it would be this way. And it kind of ends in a positive way of keeping them on track. So we do that. We also provide, the town provides first aid training, defibrillator training, and CPR training. And they keep the employee current on their CPR certification. And so that usually happens sometime within the first year of when they've started working for us. Twice a year, we go through accident prevention training. And what we found to be very effective is we have over the years accumulated videos of what our drivers have done. And when they've had crashes or accidents, and when we approach it kind of like, hey, what's the best practice to avoid yourself getting in this situation? So it just generates discussion then among the drivers, and they start working off of each other's comments, and it ends up being a very positive thing that we feel like we've been very successful. Like last year, I think we provided 62,000 trips, and we had, I think, 11 accidents. So, if you look at the accident rate per trip, it's pretty darn good. So anyways, that's what we do. So.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. Any thoughts or questions for John that he shared pertinent to the driver assessment piece, or just things that you've incorporated into your own practices? I see Franny's on the call. Hi, Franny. I didn't see you earlier, so I didn't get a good chance to let you introduce yourself. Did you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Janine, and hi, everybody. My name is Frances Anton, and I with part of the Tohono O'odham Nation, and we have a couple of vehicles here at Archie Hendricks Nursing Home. We're way out here in the desert, so we're really remote. But most of our transports are to Tucson, Casa Grande, Phoenix, Mesa, all in those areas. So it's been working pretty good for us. And I'm just glad I was able to join you guys. I was almost not going to be able to, but I'm glad I made it in.
Well, glad to have you. Did you have any thoughts to share about what you do over at your organization for either onboarding your drivers or doing some kind of assessment on their practices as a driver?
Not anything different from everybody. Mostly, we do our inspections in the morning before our trips, and also a post inspection. So that's pretty much ongoing for us. We do check for make sure we check on the lifts, make sure they're working properly. And if there's anything wrong with them, we try to get it repaired right away. But mainly, our drivers are pretty good at keeping the vehicle up to date and maintenance. And main thing is our tires. Our tires are probably the main thing that we have to focus on all the time, because we drive so far. We have to replace our tires at least twice a year on our vehicles. And we have about 10 vehicles here, although 2 are not operable. So we're using 8 right now. So our tires is probably the main thing that we have to keep, make sure we check on them, and just because of the mileage that we travel every day.
Thank you, Franny.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you could join us.
Thank you.
All right. What other elements should we be thinking about for the driver assessment piece before we go on to an element that I think John mentioned a moment ago, which is accident prevention, which is going to be the next element I wanted to kind of talk about. So for accident prevention, I was curious if anyone wanted to share kind of what their approach is. So when we talk about accident prevention, it can be anything from, emergency maneuvers. So I know Steve had mentioned kind of a nice reminder about, smaller movements. It means smaller corrections. I think it was something in that space. But things can happen out on the road. So sometimes there are specific maneuvers that unfortunately people need to exercise to stay safe. But then it could be kind of tying back to what Franny just said about the tires and how they do their inspections, just that periodic inspection and repair, being really mindful of their tires, because they go through tires pretty quickly. Tire pressure changes because of seasonal changes. It's something that's kind of easy to overlook if we're not careful, right? That the tire pressure might not be the same. How you report findings on vehicles. And I know the Beacon Group did a great job of, in their presentation, showing the tool that they use for that. But it could be even braking techniques or any kind of skills testing. And so maybe you do skills testing in a live environment, so to speak, on the road, real time, kind of the ride-alongs that were characterized, or maybe you do it in a more private setting or neutral setting, like that was talked about, I think, by Hope, in a all parking lot, kind of off-street conditions. So I was just kind of curious what different organizations' approaches are for accident prevention. And I know Town of Aurora Valley has their own program for that. Just kind of curious what anyone might want to share. And I see Franny's hands up, so I'm going to call on Franny for a moment. Go ahead, Franny.
Yeah, I was gonna, just mention one of the things that it's really dangerous for us on our roads out here on the nation is the potholes. Some of them are really bad. And so sometimes we have to, if we have another route to take, that's, the road is better, we'll take that, but sometimes we can't avoid it. The roads that we normally take every day to like local appointments, they're really bad. And it's something that we've been dealing with for a lot of years. Potholes. Then there comes the rocks. And then we do replace a lot of our windshields also throughout the year because of the rocks. People that pass us, the rock will fly, and some of them are pretty big, are the cracks in our windows, and then they go, all over. So we have to replace the whole windshield. Some more than others. Sometimes we do also twice a year, we will replace our windshields, but those are some of the dangerous things that we encounter on a daily basis. And then not to mention traffic. We're out here, there's the main road, which we use is 86, Highway 86. There's a lot of travelers, Rocky Point, people that are traveling to Rocky Point. They speed, they pass cars, and it's really dangerous. So we have to be mindful when we're, transporting our residents, that we have to be alert, and we have to remember where these potholes are. And, it's really stressful for my drivers because we always have to be, extra cautious, for safety, of course. But I just wanted to share that with you. It's really, it's a challenge out here.
Thank you, Franny. I think that's a good perspective to share, because different organizations are traveling in different parts of the region. They face different obstacles or barriers or just challenges. And so what you might incorporate into your practices might be different than someone else, but there's still some valuable elements to learn from that, even if you're not in a quite so rural setting as you are. So thank you. I think I heard someone else beginning to share, and I missed who it was, so I apologize. Was there any other thoughts on accident prevention, or what you do to people to try to avoid accidents, like specific things that you train on?
Hi, Janine. This is Steve with Hope. We actually recently just implemented a separate safety training, a driver's training, because we really wanted to drive home those little, and I hate to say it, but those common sense things that seem to be a lost art in today's employees and staff. And we do that at the one-on-one. We go through that training with them, and then annually, either Irma and myself or both of us will get with each program or each site and do it with the entire team at once, just to remind them about, not fiddling with the radio when you're driving down the road, and following distance, and increasing that during inclement weather, and how distracted driving, which even includes talking to your passengers, really creates unsafe situations. So we just felt it was important to really bring up that general awareness that people they get into a routine, and then that's when bad things happen. So we chose to do that just in order to try and reduce the number of incidents that we were seeing.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else?
Hi, Janine. This is Dylan.
Hi, Dylan.
I have a couple things that we do at Suntran. So obviously, when our drivers are hired initially, they have to have their CDL. And then so there's a test involved with that. And then we also go out onto the road and do a live skills test or a live drive test, just so they can get comfortable and familiar with the bus. And then here at the North Yard, we just installed a mirror station. So right before they pull out of the yard, there's some cones that they pull up to, and they have to make sure that all of the cones are visible in their mirrors to make sure that the mirrors are properly aligned and they're not missing any traffic or any cars that could potentially come by. And then I would also like to say, just for the driver assessment, there are a couple things that we do. So we have the supervisors they'll do a ride check or they'll ride along to make sure that the operator is, performing the route. well and everything, or they're checking to make sure that the route itself is performing well. So do some stuff with on-time performance. So thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. I appreciate that. I had one question. When you do your ride-alongs, is it like multiple drivers that have been hired and they're just going to get on like one bus together and observe that particular bus driver, or do they get separated out onto different buses so it's more one-on-one?
Usually they'll get separated out, so it's one-on-one, and usually the ride-alongs happen with when you have a trainee and a trainer, and then the supervisor will get on just to make sure that the training is going well and everything's functioning as it should.
Very good. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Anyone else? All right, we're going to move to the next item, so to speak, with regard to driver evaluation practices. And it's about like defensive driving. So they kind of overlap a little bit with regard to accident prevention. So I apologize in advance for that. It's again, trying to drill down and go from a very high level view to be more specific or perhaps a little bit more granular. So like, specific to defensive driving practices, I know Franny had shared that out in their area. They face some, different challenges, whether it be potholes or vacationers, if you will, that are just super excited to get to Rocky Point and maybe just a little too excited and not driving in the safest manner. So they have to be, very cognizant of that. But also the road can look different one day than the next, depending on, how much rain they had or just how much traffic. It impacts like new potholes from developing or just ones that existed getting bigger, et cetera. And then of course, the rocks, she said that, can kind of fly up out of nowhere and unfortunately crack a windshield. But so the maneuvers, if you will, that they have, or practices that they have to put in place to be mindful of that and stay safe might be some of the same kind of practices that even if you're not in a rural setting would be helpful. So it could be evasive steering. It could be back to those emergency maneuvers, how to do an emergency stop, dare I say an off-road recovery if something like that were to happen. But like what happens if the brakes fail? I mean, we hope that that would never happen, right? But what if, right? Or back to tires again, like what if there's a blowout or, a significant or a more immediate type of flat, not necessarily a blowout, but it's losing air very quickly. And then any type of like skid control or recovery. I mean, we live in a climate where we don't really have to deal with ice and snow and stuff like that. But on a first rain, after it's been dry a while and there's lots of on the road, roads could be still slippery. So I'm just kind of curious what things are incorporated into any kind of defensive driving practices or any trainings that you send people to help them be equipped in that space. It's definitely, a prevention technique, but I was just curious what practices, if any, are in existence right now. So I'm just going to open it up for anyone to share if that's something that they are looking at or they, currently try to send people to a particular organization or for that kind of training, or if they do it in-house. Or maybe it's something we need to look at. I don't know. That's why I'm asking these questions. So just curious. You may have anything to share? Or any of those topics sound like something they'd want to learn more about? I mean, I'll let you decide to what extent you want to discuss these items, but I am curious to see like what is already incorporated into our practices currently.
I know we cover a lot of that in our new employee training and our initial hands-on training. We literally are blessed with the opportunity to show like cuts from KVOA TV4 or 5 or whatever they're called down here, where it shows one of our vehicles in the middle of the floodwaters because we had somebody do that. So we're able to really, I mean, we even go as far as this is what you do in case of a haboob. So we really try to cover all the oddballs. You know, when you talk about road conditions, like we have two of the exact same vehicles that we got at the same time. One's in Tucson, one's in Nogales. They roughly have the same mileage, but we really remind folks, you know, how to drive more carefully depending on your road conditions, because in Nogales, we've gone through 2 sets of tires on the same vehicle that we still have the same original set of tires on in Tucson because those roads in Nogales are so bad. No disrespect to the Nogales area, but so I think it's something we incorporate even in our driver safety training. We just are constantly driving home. This is what you need to look for. This is what you should be aware of. This is, you know, we even remind people you need to get a good night's sleep. If you come in and you haven't slept well, you need to let somebody know because we don't want you behind the wheel of a vehicle if you're sleepy. So it's I think it's kind of woven through a lot of our trainings, probably the other agencies as well.
Very good. Thank you, Steve. I'm glad you brought up the haboob or like the dust storms, because that is something, especially for agencies that make, like Franny had articulated, they make really long distance trips all the way out, you know, to Mesa, and so they're on the freeway, et cetera. And so when you're heading in that direction, unfortunately, sometimes on I-10 we do experience, you know, significant dust storms. But even if you're not on a route where you have to worry about that, we all have to navigate like monsoon season, where, you know, 1 minute the road's fine and the next minute it's, you know, it's flooded. So I was curious how many organizations do have some kind of training that talks about like dust storms or, you know, flooding, what the rules are, or what the practices are for that.
Hi, Janine. I can talk about the flooding, since that is obviously the main occurrence here in Tucson, and you don't want to put a 40-foot bus through some water. So we have detour maps that we have created that we give out to the drivers that they have available to them in their operator information guide. And then usually dispatch will know, or we'll let them know in advance to start using their detours for either flood or construction. We are also able to show some videos from past accidents from the perspective of the driver and actually on the bus. And so in the most recent safety meetings, there were a couple of those that we showed to drivers just to give them an idea of, you know, how fast accidents can happen. And, you know, maybe there isn't anything you can do to prevent it, but just some ideas. And then we also do have the triple LC method of defensive driving, which is the look ahead, the look around, leave room, and communicate principles. So.
All right, thank you. I may reach out to you about the detour maps. I have a question for you. So, but
yeah, of course.
Just kind of more curious, like how you put those together and what we could learn from that to support other organizations that may not necessarily have such, you know, clearly defined fixed routes where, you know, there's a very specific stop that they're going to make at a certain interval of time every single day. But they do have, you know, some sense of like, in general, we're traveling in this area and we tend to drive, you know, on these particular streets most of the time. So if we were to, you know, incur a situation where there is flooding or potential flooding, you know, what other routes could we take and have some confidence that that's a safer approach. So perhaps there's some wisdom there that can be learned so others can kind of develop their own detour maps, if you will, if that's something they think would be helpful. So I might lean in on your wisdom on how those get together. So
yeah, of course.
All right, thank you. All right, anything else? Anyone else want to share on that? All right, we're going to move to the last element for driver evaluation, and it's pretty much just kind of wrapping up everything into a bow, so to speak, for more in the curriculum space. So in training standards, and I know, or I believe I know that like Hope shared that they use Relias training system for some of their curriculum. And then I believe, you know, Town of Oro Valley shared that they use the PASS training for certain components of their training. But I was just curious, you know, how much of our training, you know, throughout the region is developed in-house, like you're actually developing your own curriculum, and how much of it is somewhat outsourced, right? Like you rely on it from a well-known, you know, vendor of training services. Because there's value in both, right? So if a lot of us are leaning externally and there's some great training programs out there, what are those so that we can share them so other people can benefit that might not be aware of those training programs? But in the same breath, if you have a skill set for curriculum design and people who are trying to create curriculum on their own could benefit from, you know, your wisdom and your insights on how to get started doing it, we can kind of facilitate partnering up together to help one another in that way. So just curious where people land on that, or are most of us just developing it in-house, or are we, you know, looking through other providers, or is it kind of a blended element? So
At Hope, all of our trainings are developed in-house, but we use Relias to track them and to make them part of we lump them in with the access trainings and stuff like that. So we develop them and then we load them up into Relias for our staff.
thank you. And then the last question I would have for the group pertinent to training is kind of like, what's the methodology or the approach that you use for either identifying new training needs amongst your drivers, or what's your approach for saying like, well, we know what the need is, but these are the resources or the support systems that we have in place to try to meet that need. And you know, and how do you plan it out? Like, okay, we've identified a need. It looks like we need to do this kind of training every 3 months or every 6 months or once a year. And I think one organization mentioned how, yes, someone can have a great MVD record upon hire, and, you know, 9 months later, that might not be true. So annually we ask for it again. And that's kind of how we can bring those things to light. So while that's not necessarily a training, that's more of an onboarding and an ongoing review element. The same kind of approach can be taken for some of these trainings, saying like, okay, it's not a one and done. We need to do this periodically. We also need to, you know, sharpen the saw, so to speak, and add new components. And, you know, how do we make those decisions, and how often should types of trainings come into place? So curious what the school of thought is on that. Like, how do you make those decisions? You want to share on how they come up with that, or they do for that?
Hey, Janine, this is John.
Yeah.
So in Oro Valley, we do our annual bloodborne pathogen training in August because it's one of our slowest months usually. And so we have to bring everybody in. So what we do is we do it over a 5-day period, but that doesn't take that long. So we fell into a routine of adding accident prevention training to that, and then we'll usually have some other element that we add to it. For example, one year we had the police department come and give a little briefing on active shooter training, and so we'll usually just add a couple of more things to that bloodborne pathogen training, since we have to bring everybody in anyways for it. So that's just one practice that we fell into that seems to work really good.
Okay, Great, thank you. I was going to suggest, and this is something I'm just planting a seed around, but perhaps there's an opportunity that if your organization is hosting a training, whether it be a ride along or some kind of driver assessment, or like we were talking about the accident prevention training, that if someone from another organization kind of wanted to sit in and see what it looks like and feels like, if other organizations are open to having another organization come in and sit on it, that would be one great opportunity to kind of advance the level of coordination. But another opportunity might be that if you, let's say you have 15 seats in your training, making up a number, and on your roster, it looks like you can only schedule 9 of your staff members on that particular training date. So, you know, the math suggests that there's still 6 seats available. If it makes sense and you are okay with extending that opportunity for other drivers to come and be a part of that particular training from other organizations, that'd be another way that organizations in our region could coordinate around training and also kind of share best practices in the same light. So something to think about, something to consider. If that makes sense, we could talk about that fully and figure out how to kind of make those pieces happen. But I think there are some great opportunities for organizations to learn from one another and to kind of make the most of the training resources that we have across our region, because everyone's so talented and spends so much time developing these great tools and resources and has very unique insights relative to the work that they do. I think there's an opportunity to kind of share that and equally benefit, right? Because you learn a lot when you teach someone else as well, right? So I might plant that seed out there again in email and see how many people are interested or open to exploring that a little bit more fully. So, all right, so we're going to actually move to the next item on the agenda. This time it's for real. We really are moving to the next item on the agenda, and that's safety procedures and fostering a safety culture. So that's a big statement. So there's a lot of stuff in that, and we could spend, you know, weeks unpacking this. But I thought we just kind of have a discussion about kind of the mindset behind it, if you will, right? So if we were to keep it really simple, each organization probably has very specific values or beliefs or attitudes about safety and what that looks like. And so those attitudes or those values, et cetera, they kind of create your own organizational culture by proxy. And so those attitudes and those behaviors that go hand in hand, they will either increase your risk for problems, or they'll, you know, decrease your risk. And so I was just kind of curious how you as an organization or what you do to kind of promote, obviously the healthy culture, right? That where people value safety, they value having the right mindset, the right attitude, so that the behaviors reflect that. And then if that's true, then what are kind of the observable behaviors that you look for that says our behaviors match the values that we say that we hold with regard to safety? So so observable behaviors can be, you know, following of specific safety guidelines. They could be about following procedures. They could be, you know, equipment specific related. It could be in the way that you observe, you know, your drivers. It could be in the monitoring. It could be the way that you provided feedback. I know Town of Oro Valley talked about how they have their coaching points. There's lots of different layers to this, right? This is a very broad topic, but just as a starting point, I thought it'd be interesting to kind of take a look at what are the things that we know that we're doing in our organizations to help affirm a specific healthy culture with regard to safety for our drivers, but also for the riders that we're providing transportation for. So if anyone has anything they want to share or add, it's tied closely to the things that we've already talked about, but I was just kind of curious what you're seeing in terms of how things influence your safety culture in your organization.
We really tie it to our members at Hope. So we don't have anybody that just drives and does no other interaction with our members. All of our drivers are also peer supports or peer navigators or intakes, therapists, things like that. And so we really drive home that safety is really about respecting our members and showing them respect and showing that how we care for them. And so it's always tied back to our members, to our clientele, because they're the reason that we implement all those safeties, and for our staff as well. But really it's because we want to take care of our main mission, which is our members.
Thank you, Steve. I think a lot of organizations can kind of identify with what you were saying in terms of a lot of their staff is not, their only job isn't as a driver. They wear many hats. And so, and they offer, different types of support as well. So I think there's some similarities there. There are organizations where the drivers, that is their primary role. They don't, quote unquote, switch hats once they finish doing a particular trip. But regardless, I think there's definitely some commonalities there. I know some organizations, oh, I see Deborah's hands up. Go ahead. Go ahead, Deborah.
Yeah, I wanted to say that rang a bell with me because we are a small organization, vocational, and while our staff members do drive as needed, it's not a routine job that they do every day. However, our agency's focus is on safety, safe service delivery, and making sure our clients and our programs are valued and safe always. So we do across the board, we do monthly safety trainings. We do monthly safety meetings with the members that we serve. And, these topics are discussed intermittently. Supervisors have an opportunity, at least, we're trying to encourage supervisors to have check-ins with the staff as frequently as possible, ideally monthly, sometimes more like quarterly or semi-annually, to discuss issues, and safety is always a priority. When the weather changes, when programs change, when activities change, we focus on the safety for our clients as well as for our staff. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Deborah. The next portion of the safety procedures and fostering a safety culture has to do with how do we find the balance in making sure that productivity, if you will, doesn't compromise the importance of safety. So when we talk about pre-trip inspections, for example, or even post-trip, right? You can hurry and get through a whole bunch of inspections. And so there, by proxy, you are productive, right? You've checked a lot of boxes. But if things are getting overlooked and you've compromised safety at the, because of trying to be, quote unquote, so productive. And so how do organizations find the balance in ensuring that, yes, we want to be productive, we want to do all of the elements of the inspection, but it can't come at the price of safety. And in the same breath with that, how you find the balance in what I'll call is the non-punitive reporting. So you want people to be honest and forthright about things that they see, whether it be damage on their own vehicle that happened or, something being wrong about the vehicle, but not have this internal fear that if I report it, I'm going to lose my job. And so then it doesn't get reported. So how do you find the balance in encouraging people to to talk about things that have happened, even if they're not so positive, so that the right steps can take place afterwards to correct it, but also to ensure, you know, whatever needs to not happen doesn't happen again, if that makes sense. So just curious how you navigate some of those things.
We rarely take any action when somebody has an incident, other than we have them go through the hands-on refresher again. We tend to go after though not reporting. So if somebody has an incident and they don't report it, it's not the incident that we really go after. It's really the fact that they didn't follow procedure. So it's we actually make it a point to praise people who have an incident and then follow through with the policies and report things correctly and stuff like that, because we want to encourage that and let people know that, hey, if you have, you know, accidents happen, mistakes happen, we're not going to punish anybody for that. We really want them to follow through. So it's we try not to be punitive, but we celebrate the following through on the policy versus trying to cover it.
Very good. Thank you, Steve. Anyone else have any thoughts or comments about how they kind of find the balance about with accountability for different procedures and policies and practices, but also how there's the balancing act in terms of how it can, depending on how it's delivered or shaped, it can impact, you know, the culture either positively or negatively. Anyone want to share how they set those expectations or provide feedback or even offer any kind of reward for following the right practices, even if it means you're reporting on something that isn't so positive? Anyone want to share how they navigated that? Maybe rewards isn't a thing. Does any organization offer rewards for specific things happening? Right. So I'm going to take that as a no for the rewards part. What about providing timely feedback? Like what are some definitions of timely feedback? It might be relative to the topic at hand, but if we have some examples of, we cover this and we make sure that they get feedback within the same day or within 30 days, or it's part of the annual review, or it's part of their 6-month review. Anyone want to share how they provide feedback? Or I guess the operative word was timely feedback. So let me rephrase that.
Hey, Janine, this is John from Morro Valley.
Yeah.
We, going back to the previous question, we audit to make sure that people are doing their pre-trips properly.
Mhm.
So we'll hide pre-trip inspection tags on a vehicle, maybe under the hood, or something as simple as on the personal protective equipment kit or something. We don't really hide them. They're very obvious if the person is actually checking to see during their pre-trip inspection. And then if they find it, they get a $5 gift card to their choice. It's like Starbucks or whatever. And then if they don't find it, then and they don't stop by the office on the way out of the bus yard, then we call them on the radio and we say, hey, we need to meet with you after your route. Make sure you stop in the office. And then we give them a discipline letter.
Can you tell a little bit about what that means when you say a discipline letter? Just for context, so people know kind of what you mean by that.
Well, it's not like we slam them real hard, but we say, look, you obviously are not doing your pre-trip inspections as in accordance with the policy, and you need to tighten up on that and start doing them correctly. And so,
and it goes in their file. So they don't want to do it, get another one. So they'll start doing it right after that.
I understand.
But that doesn't happen very often. Most of the time we're giving out free gift cards.
Very good. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else do anything like that or have a different approach where there isn't kind of a reward or some kind of praise or acknowledgement for people who are following the practices on a regular basis?
And this is Town of Oro Valley again. We also have another reward that the town signed off on. If we go, I think it's every 50,000 miles, I think, without an accident, no driver with an accident, then everybody gets a $5 gift card and 3 people get a $25 gift card that's drawn at random.
Very nice. All right, thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. Okay, so then the last element that I was just going to kind of bundle in there was if there was a particular training topic that, like right now, that you've identified that's something that you want to like take a closer look at to improve it, not suggesting that it's not being done well right now, but just like you're like, we want to take it to the next level, or we've identified that because we have this many more drivers, we need to have like a part 2 or whatever the reason is. But just if there is a particular training topic to drivers that you really are having your eyes set on to take a closer look at in the next like year or two, something that's on your radar. And you're probably tired of me talking about this because a lot of these topics were in the most recent survey that went out. So they should be somewhat top of mind, but I'd at least see if anybody wanted to talk about some of those particular topics. Okay, well, I think that pretty much concludes all the things that I had under safety procedures and fostering a safety culture. So like I said, I'll probably send out an email to kind of see what your thoughts are about kind of sharing training, if you will, in terms of, you know, being a guest in a training, whether it be your own drivers or just participating in a ride along to kind of observe or any other kind of training. And then I'm going to reach out to Dylan for the reasons I already shared. And then Mitchell, I wanted to thank you and your whole team for your presentation today, but perhaps you could send me an email with the right contact information for the people on your team, so that if anyone's interested in everything that you shared today and wants to learn more, they know who to contact and how to reach them.
Will do. Thank you, Janine.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. That adjourns today's meeting. I appreciate everything you do to serve people in our region. Have a great day.
Bye, Janine.
Bye.
Good to see you.
Bye-bye and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah.
Have a good rest of your day.
You too.